There's one moment that every aviation lover remembers. The time that you were at a runway, watching planes taxi down it, and all of a sudden you see it. A plane larger than most, with a sleek, elegant design. This is of course the 747, the Queen of the Skies, and arguably one of history's most memorable planes. However, the 747's design is certainly a unique one, with a strange hump on its back. Have you ever wondered what this came from, and why the plane looks so distinctive? Well, over the course of this video, we're going to be looking into this, and I'll be giving you guys the history of the 747, and more specifically, the 747's hump, because the history behind it might actually surprise you. We're taking a flight back to the time where one of history's most iconic planes was born. So if you do enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, because I am of course here on a new channel, and again I do appreciate the support. Let's have a look at the 747 story tonight. Now, the story of the 747 takes us back to the 1960s, a time when the world was rapidly changing. People were flying more than ever before, and the 707 had made jet travel really accessible. People were getting across the world at miracle speed compared to previous propeller-driven aeroplanes. Airports buzzed with excitement. Glossy magazines were printed full of ads with smiling sweethearts and destinations to travel to. Drinks were served on planes, to passengers in suits and dresses. Flying was still a luxurious, romantic privilege. But there was one problem rapidly growing. Airlines were running out of space. Flights were full, airports were crowded, and international carriers were desperate for something larger, faster, and more capable. A plane that could shrink the world even further than the 707 already had. And this is where one man stepped forwards. Juan Trippe, the powerful, visionary CEO of Pan Am. Trippe wasn't just running an airline, he was shaping global travel. And he wanted a plane twice the size of the 707. A machine so large it could carry hundreds of passengers in a single trip. A feat basically unheard of up to this point. And he approached Boeing with a proposal which sounded simple. Why not just build a larger plane? The biggest passenger plane in the world, he said. Something that will make air travel affordable to everybody, not just the wealthy. And Boeing listened, and they said yes. But little did they know the decision would entangle them in one of the most unexpected engineering battles of the century, and lead to the creation of arguably the most famous hump in aviation. Now, at the same time, whilst Pan Am and Boeing were dreaming of a flying palace, something was happening behind the scenes, something far more serious. The United States Air Force was in the middle of a massive strategic shift. The Cold War was raging, and the military needed enormous transport aircraft capable of moving tanks, missile components, helicopters, and entire units of troops halfway around the world. They needed the biggest plane ever built too. So they put out a challenge, an open competition inviting airline manufacturers to put out a giant military transport craft, and Boeing saw this as an opportunity. Winning a contract like this could bring in billions in funding, prestige, and engineering breakthroughs. And even though they were designing a passenger superjet for Pan Am, they realized something quite important. If they could merge the two ideas, commercial and military, they could build one airplane with two futures. A dream craft that carried civilians today, and cargo tomorrow. A bold and risky move, and one that would push their engineers into a design territory previously never explored. But the Air Force had one requirement that would change everything. The military wanted something extremely specific. A cargo plane with a nose that opens upward. This was key. In their ideal world, a tank or huge cargo container would roll straight into the front of the aircraft, as if the plane itself were a giant steel mouth swallowing the machinery whole. It made perfect sense for logistics, and zero for traditional aircraft design. Because if the front of the plane is a door, you can't put the cockpit there. And that left Boeing with one problem that no one had faced before. Where would you put the pilots if the nose swung open like a garage door? And this is where creativity took over. Boeing's engineers gathered in rooms, sketching idea after idea, trying to figure out where the cockpit would go. Some proposals were ridiculous, some were brilliant, but impossible, and some looked like alien spaceships. Until someone thought of the unthinkable. Why don't we move the cockpit up there? They pointed at a sketch showing a raised platform, an upper level perched above the main fuselage. It looked strange, it looked unconventional, it almost looked like a mistake, but it worked. The cockpit moved up, the nose became free to open, and in that moment, unintentionally, the hump was born. Not for beauty, not for elegance, not even for passengers, but simply for practicality. So forklifts and tanks could fit easily through the front. This part of the story is the part that most never hear. The Hump wasn't born in luxury, it was born in the mind of engineers trying to please the military. And Boeing was convinced that eventually all passenger jets would become supersonic, so their giant subsonic jet would end its life hauling cargo anyway. The Hump wasn't a fashion choice, it was simply future-proofing. The 747 was designed for a future that never arrived. Boeing poured everything into the military competition. They built prototypes, engineered new systems, and designed giant wings that could support massive loads. But in the end, they lost. The Air Force rejected Boeing's design and chose the Lockheed C-5 Galaxy instead. In an instant, Boeing's military ambitions evaporated. All the engineering work, all the investment and all the design elements, including the strange elevated cockpit, were suddenly useless for the government. But Pan Am was still waiting. They still wanted their superjet. They still wanted an aircraft that would change the world. So Boeing looked at what they had created. A giant frame, a powerful design, a raised cockpit, and a massive fuselage. And then they realised something crucial. This can still work. And they decided to keep the Hump, even though the military no longer needed the nose to open, because they still believed that someday, when supersonic jets took over passenger travel, the 747 would simply move into cargo service. The raised cockpit meant that the nose could open if needed. The Hump gave the aircraft flexibility, and the design was ready for an unpredictable future. What Boeing didn't know is that the Hump would end up defining the plane and becoming a global aviation icon. Once Boeing committed to keeping the Hump, they suddenly realised that they've created a massive extra space behind the cockpit, a long, narrow upper deck. It was too small to be a full cabin, it was too large to ignore. So they thought about what passengers wanted, and what airlines wanted, especially Pan Am, and they wanted glamour. An idea emerged, an idea that transformed aviation luxury overnight. The Hump would become a lounge, soft lighting, champagne bars, sofas, extra seating accessible by only a spiral staircase. It became the most desirable place on the aircraft, an upstairs sanctuary for the wealthy, the famous, and the lucky. And suddenly the Hump wasn't just engineering, it was a selling point. It added mystique, it added status, and it added something that no other plane had. People loved the 747 not just for its size, but for its shape, this strange, beautiful and unmistakable silhouette. The Hump gave the 747 personality. And here's where the story gets even more remarkable. The Hump wasn't originally designed to improve aerodynamics. If anything, it should have made the airflow worse. But Boeing's engineers refined it so carefully, so smoothly, that the transition between the upper deck and the main fuselage became more efficient with the Hump than without it. It reduced drag, it improved handling, and it actually added balance to the aircraft perfectly. The Hump was no longer a compromise, it was a masterpiece, and the 747 flew into the skies with unprecedented grace. It could cross the ocean non-stop. It could carry more passengers than anything before it. It could handle enormous weights. And it did it all whilst looking like nothing else in the air. The Hump wasn't just a toleration, it was actually a celebration. And when the 747 took to the skies in 1970, the world changed. Air travel became a lot cheaper. Mass tourism was born. Families could fly internationally for the first time, and airlines could reach distant markets. The global economy accelerated. The 747 became a cultural icon, featured in movies, flown by presidents, and used by NASA to transport the space shuttle. And every single time someone saw that shape, the long fuselage, the towering tail, and the unmistakable hump, They knew exactly what they were looking at. This wasn't just an airplane. It was a symbol of possibility, a celebration of engineering courage, a triumph of ambition, a reminder that sometimes the strangest ideas become the most legendary. As the years passed, the hump grew longer, the upper deck expanded, first-class lounge transformed into premium seating. The hump stretched into a sleeker upper level, almost half the second floor. The new versions of the 747, like the 747-300, the -400, and eventually the -8, featured extended humps that became even more iconic. Meanwhile, the freighter version of the aircraft continued the nose door, justifying the raised cockpit design decades after it first appeared. The hump had finally fulfilled its dual destiny: luxury on passenger versions, practicality on cargo versions, and what began as an awkward necessity ended up being one of the most flexible design features in aviation history. And after an iconic run spanning decades, in 2023, Boeing completed the last 747. After more than 50 years, production had ended. It was a bittersweet moment, not just for Boeing, but for the world. However, the hump lives on. It's etched into the memory of billions of travellers. It's recognised by children who've never flown. It's beloved by pilots, engineers and enthusiasts. And it is instantly identifiable in any silhouette, logo or photo. No other aircraft had this shape. It's so emotional, so powerful, and the irony remains. The most famous feature in aviation wasn't for the passengers, or the style, or even marketing. The hump simply exists because a group of engineers had to move the cockpit out of the way so that the nose could open for cargo that never came. Was it a mistake? A gamble? A future-proofing decision? Either way, it shaped history. So why does the 747 have its hump? The short answer is because the world needed an aircraft that could do everything: carry people, carry cargo, and shape economies, shrink continents, and inspire generations. Because engineers dared to try something different, because Pan Am wanted a superjet, and because the military wanted a tank transporter. Because Boeing took risks that many companies would never dare. But most importantly, because sometimes the quirkiest features create the greatest legends. The hump didn't just define the plane, it defined the era. And the Boeing 747, with its strange and glorious, unforgettable hump, will forever be the queen of the skies, one of the most memorable planes in history. Thank you for watching the video, guys. Do let me know if you enjoyed this one. If you did, of course, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.